Okay, here we are. We're covering Chapter 5, God's Heroes and Athletes. This is the Grecian period, and it is broken into 5 separate periods: geometric art, Orientalizing, Archaic, Classic, and Hellenistic. Orientalizing is smaller because I'm just going to touch on it briefly so that you can recognize the difference between Orientalism and geometric and archaic, but I will touch on that briefly. All right, so a little bit about Greece and its country. It was quite diverse geographically and climate-wise, and they lived around the Mediterranean Sea from Turkey as far as to the south of France. And they had mountain ridges dividing their small units, their small little city-states, and they had a rugged coastline that was half land and half sea. They had a vigorous climate, as cold in the winter and dry and hot in the summer, somewhat similar to our summers that we have here. And you need to know that previous to the Grecians, there was the precursors were the Aegean cultures of Crete and Minos, and College Board in their infinite wisdom has chosen for us not to cover any of those pieces, so I won't even talk about them. But you need to know that there was another culture before the Greece came to power. So when you think of Greece or Grecians in literature, you probably think of the Iliad and by Homer. And in late 19th century, these cities and their art were unearthed by many archaeologists. And you can see the Aegean civilizations were the forerunners, but their cultures vanished, and they greatly influenced the new culture in Greece. And you can see here on the map where a lot of where they lived, all down in here, a couple over here. So you can see that there's a lot of area where the Greeks had lived. So they formed their own city-states and their own politics, economics, religions, and the centers were in Athens and Corinth and Sparta. These city-states were small, competing political entities, and they were united by religion and language. They all had a fear, obviously, of outside invaders, and each managed their own domestications and foreign affairs. Manufacturing, commercial skills, and the military were their strengths. And Corinth was the oldest and most powerful. However, Athens became the symbol of Greece and its culture. Exercise and beautiful bodies were very important to them, and education in their daily life. All citizens participated in assembly, had equal rights to own property, to exercise freedom of speech, to vote, to hold public office, and to serve in military services. However, citizenship was only open to Athenian men. In the census of 309 BCE, 21,000 souls lived. 10,000 of them were foreigners, and there were 400,000 who were labeled other, which would have been women, children, and slaves. So you can see where they placed women and children at the same level as slaves. And slavery was regarded as a natural institution in Greece. In fact, slaves could gain their own freedom. Okay, so Greeks saw their gods as immortal and supernatural powers. They visualized them in the human form, though, with human weaknesses. So human beings were the center of their Greek culture, in as much as their gods came in human form. Everything was idealized and created this perfect individual in their sculptures and in their art. Perfect balance of intellect and physique, and a focus on painting and sculpture and architecture and mathematics and science, philosophy. These were the driving forces behind Grecian society. Grecian art has had an impact on Europe and really the rest of the world. So let's start with the geometric amphora, which was found in the Dipleon Cemetery. And here we are in Athens. Around 1100 BCE, the mainland of Greece the Athenian culture began to form and began to develop a major center of ceramic production. Created both sculptures and vessels decorated with organized abstract designs. A vessel is a ceramic pot that holds liquids or holds dry goods. This, however, would not have held food or stored it. It would have been used as a grave stele. It would have been placed on like a gravestone, like we would use today. So there's lots of spirals and diamonds and cross-hatching, and the reason why it's called geometric. So these craters had holes at the bottom, and so they put liquids in the vessels, so that the liquid could run out from the bottom of the pot onto the grave itself, and it was a part of their ritual in their funeral procession or burial process. So in this vessel, let's move to the next slide and get a close-up of it. You can see the individual, the deceased, is laying on a cot, and they are about to be cremated. We see women standing with their hands on top of their heads and literally pulling their hair out in grief, surrounded by the mourners. And we also see animals in here, like a goose or, I'm not sure with the bottom, maybe it's a dog underneath the cot. But we see lots and lots of geometric patterns, very little negative space. It's mostly positive. They've filled almost every little corner of it. So here are the mourning figures, the mourning women with their hair, pulling their hair out in grief. And here we see the horse-drawn chariots. We see the swords, we see shields, and we see people in frontal view, and we also see people in composite view. We see lots of geometric patterns. We also see registers, that things are still broken in registers, and so we'll see a narrative pattern going around the vessel, and then the different geometric patterns above and below. So let's go back there. I have a few more notes here. It says, for the Egyptian, their art reflected the belief that the afterwards people could engage in activities they enjoyed for a while alive, while the Greeks, the deceased entered a place of mystery that could not be defined. Thus, their art is in contrast, focused on the emotional reaction of the survivor. The video attached is something that you did in homework, so we won't go over that. So this is what I wanted to show you in the Orientalism. So when you look at this, we don't even think Grecian. It doesn't remind us of anything Grecian. But at this time, they began to trade in the Near East, which is the Mesopotamian cultures. And so the griffin and the sphinx and the centaurs and maybe a lamassu, those different mythical creatures started to show up in their pottery. You can see these, I'm not sure what this creature is, but it looks like half bird and half lion-like with the feet, and then up at the top it looks more dragon-like. It's hard to know really what it was. But when you compare it to the geometric period, you can see they're still using registers, so they're separating both the geometric patterns around and also the mythical creatures. There's still registers. We have profile view. And it just looks it's more exotic than what we would think of as Grecian. So I just wanted to introduce this to you so that you would recognize it if you see it on the test. Okay.